Okay, we look at a variety of factors and we consider these kind of our objectives. How the garden will function, what is the style of your home perhaps, or what style you're looking for in the garden, what might be your color preferences, what type of plants you would select. We always need to consider maintenance. How much gardening are you really willing to do, or maybe you're going to hire someone to do some of that. What budget are you working with? Do you want fragrance? Do you want to attract butterflies, bees to the garden? So we look at a wide variety of different objectives to determine the garden design. There's different terminology that will explain the principles of design, but I like to use order, unity, and rhythm. And we can look at that as our principles of design. So order, unity, and rhythm. And in order, we might have symmetrical balance. We would have mass collection where we're using plants in masses. We would look to dominance where we might have a piece of art or a color that would be the focal point. We look at repetition, repetition of color, repetition of texture or form. And we might look at rhythm as well, how the garden changes or undulates. We have small plants moving into medium, growing plants into tall plants. That all creates these principles of order, unity, and rhythm. The more time you have, probably the larger the garden would be, the more higher maintenance plants you would incorporate into the garden. And hopefully you'd have a budget to help with that as well. And again, available time, the less time you have, you definitely want to focus on lower maintenance plants, a smaller garden, perhaps larger masses of plants with fewer species, which really helps reduce the maintenance. Your style should be your garden's design. So the garden should reflect who you are and where you are. So don't be concerned about doing what everyone else is doing or what the latest trend is. Pick a style, pick colors, pick textures that are a reflection of you, colors that you've used in your home, textures, art that you've used in your home can be repeated in the garden, and that will reflect the style. Often we want to consider a sense of place, unifying the design of the garden with our location, where we are geographically, what architectural style might be used in your area should also be reflected or considered at least as part of the style in the garden. Well, you need to know how you'd like the garden to function. Do you want flowers for cutting? Will you be entertaining in the evening? That will affect with what type plants, what color you use. Do you want to attract butterflies? Do you want to have various wildlife come into the garden? So all of that needs to be looked at right at the beginning. Will we incorporate fragrance? And that would be a big consideration in the plants that drive the design. We can choose a monochromatic color scheme where we use tints, tones, and shades of a single basic color. Polychromatic, which is on the other end of the spectrum, which is a little bit of every color, and a lot of people do that just by fault. We can do analogous or harmonious colors where we use colors that are adjacent or related to each other, or we can use complementary or contrasting colors, colors which are opposite to each other, such as red and green, violet and yellow, and that creates a dominant focal feature. So those are the primary color schemes. When we look at texture, we often look at them almost as feminine and masculine. So there's fine texture, delicate, lacy, in contrast to coarse, bold texture. And we also have kind of a mid-ground. So an easy way to look at it is fine, medium, and bold. Well, you can either do it well or you can do it very poorly. So color, texture, and form is basically everything in the garden, and the right scale and proportion of those. So many people err on the side of too many fine textures because there's a lot of plants that are available in a fine texture. So one thing to remember when you're putting a garden together is make sure you include a lot of bold textures to balance those fine textures. And when we look at form, people err on the side too of using a lot of what we call the roundy moundies. They're safe and round and just, kind of blob forms, where we want to increase the eye's drive to the vertical space, so incorporate vertical forms as well. When we look at color, color is such a huge part of design, and that will affect the mood and the action that occurs in a garden. This is another thing we need to consider in design. One of the first things to think about is what season should the garden peak. So often we try to have the garden looking good all the time, which we can usually accomplish with using foliage, color, texture, and form, but it never looks dynamic all the time. So pick a season that you want it to really shine, where everything gels, and that would be the focal point of either that border or a section of the garden or even just certain containers. Art is and a garden, I think, are interchangeable. Art will enhance the design of a garden, and the design of a garden enhances the art that's in the garden. And we use art to create a sense of place or to personalize a garden. If you have a sculpture of a favorite pet or a favorite child in the garden, nothing says that's your garden more than that piece of art. We can use art to bring color into a space where we might not be able to grow a plant of that color. We use art to direct movement in a garden, to create focal features or dominance, which is an important element of design. I often like to start just with 1/4 inch graph paper. And we use a 1/4 inch to 1 foot, and we lay out the garden on the graph paper. I then like to take tissue paper or just a simple tracing paper, lay it over top of the graph paper, outline my border, and then you can play with different forms and shapes and place your plants, and you can always take that and trash it and put a new sheet on top, but you've started with that base plan that's on just this 1/4 inch graph paper, and it's very simple to utilize.